Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 of the English Literature Poetry Focus on Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney, with me, Mr. Smith. Learning question for this lesson is, how can I identify the key features of a poem on the first reading? And this is all about thinking about those questions that we need to become habit in our minds whenever we encounter a new piece of poetry, and splitting those questions up into their appropriate categories and really getting an understanding of what a poem might be about from the very first time that we set eyes upon it. Two pieces of important vocabulary for us to understand and remember today. The first is blank verse. Now this refers to the form of the poem itself, and this is an unrhyming verse written in iambic pentameter. The second piece of vocabulary today is iambic pentameter, and that is a line of verse with 5 metrical feet, each consisting of one short or unstressed syllable followed by one long or stressed syllable. For example, 2 households, both alike in dignity. Now it doesn't make it clear when you speak it in that way, so I'm going to say it again now, but I'm going to stress the short, unstressed syllable followed by the long, stressed syllable. 2 households, both alike in dignity. Now that time you should have heard that da-dum, 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 which is the 5 metrical feet. There were 5 da-dums. The first one being the unstressed, the second being the stressed. 2 households, both alike in dignity. Iambic pentameter is an essential piece of knowledge for your study of poetry, and you will see and be able to pick out that this poem, Storm on the Island, is written in iambic pentameter. So when I perform a reading of it for you shortly, you'll be able to look out for that, even though I will not be reading it in that false da-dum, da-dum, da-dum style. Before we do get to the reading of the poem, however, let's meet Seamus Heaney. Northern Irish poet, born 1939 and he died in 2013, a great loss to the world of literature. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995. It is the ultimate global recognition of a writer. It is the World Cup of literature, and Seamus Heaney fully deserved it. He wrote many autobiographical poems, which are poems about his own life, inspired by his own life, and he was really concerned with his personal history of nature, the history of Ireland, where he was from, the modern history of Ireland, and the Unionist Republican Civil War, which raged for much of his life. And he's particularly famous for his rich lyrical writing style and love of words, for their sound, for their feeling as much as their meaning. He was a poet who was in love with language, and he enjoyed the way that words balanced and fit together, the way they sounded when they were spoken. And if you read his poetry, and I really do recommend reading his poetry, you will feel that real joy for language that he felt. But that's enough about him for the time being. We're going to get onto the poem now. And before I read it, I just want to make sure that you know about the 10 questions that we're going to think about to finish this lesson off, so you can pick up on the answers as you go along. So some of these you'll recognize because they're pretty standard ones. They should be your questions of habit that you always ask whenever you're looking at a poem, and you'll notice that they're in a very familiar organization as well. So questions 1, 2, and 3 are kind of overall questions: mood and atmosphere, personal response, lines that stand out. 4, 5, 6, and 7 are questions about structure. So it talks about the use of blank verse here. We have enjambment, which shows up. We look at a volta, don't forget that's the point of a poem where the focus or the tone shifts to something new, a development in the poem. And the iambic pentameter has a slight alteration, and there's a slight change in that in the final line. Poem imagery next, 2 questions there, and a final bonus question about one of the key images of the poem. So I'm about to start the reading here. If you would like to pause the video and read over these questions a couple of times to make sure that you're familiar with them before I begin them, please do that. and I will get on with the reading of the poem. We are prepared. We build our houses squat, sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so, as you see, there are no stacks or stucks that can be lost. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. You know what I mean. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale, so that you listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. You might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs, but no. When it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat, turns savage. We just sit tight while wind dives and strafes invisibly. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded with the empty air. Strange. It is a huge nothing that we fear. Okay, so there we have it. That was my reading of the poem, and I hope that you enjoyed it. It's time to have a look at these 10 questions now and write some answers in full sentences, please, so they're still useful to you when you look back at them in the future. Tackle them each in order, give personal and thoughtful responses to each of them. Remember, this is about getting to grips with the poem and really engaging with it. And I'm suggesting here that 10 minutes is what you'll need, but if you need more time than that, then of course that's absolutely fine. So get yourself ready, pause the video, and move on with the questions. Okay, I'm now coming back to the plenary for today's lesson, which is about making some comparisons. You've had time to think about this poem in a little bit more detail now, and I'm wondering what possible connections in terms of maybe themes or ideas that you might make between this poem and the previous two poems you've studied, Remains and Bayonet Charge. Now, those two poems, both about a soldier's experience in war, they've got some fairly obvious comparisons, but this one's a little bit less obvious. It is there, though, and it can be done. So I'd like to see what you can come up with that. Give yourself a few minutes. Don't worry about it being even correct. Just treat it as a little experiment. Write down whatever ideas you can. When you've done with that, you've completed lesson 2, and I will see you for lesson 3. Thank you very much.